Welcome to Enterprise Hardcore Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Lyons. Tonight, my friend Jim Byrne and I are going to be celebrating episode 100 and talking about several intros, significantly more than 100. But we'll get to that in a little bit. As always, you can follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Enterprise Hardcore Podcast, on Twitter at Podcast Hardcore. But also, with the changes coming, there's an Instagram that was known as at Rochester Hardcore History, which is now known as I don't know the exact handle. I think it's at Hardcore Podcast Arc. I'll have to get the exact handle, but probably at the Hardcore Archive Podcast. But I'll get the exact handle and we'll put it in the show notes because that's what you're going to be going to as well from now on. Greg and I will both be posting all sorts of stuff about the episodes, and Greg will continue to post, Rochester hardcore history, like archive stuff occasionally as well, and I'll post all sorts of cool stuff, and him and I both have some other cool stuff in the works, so we'll be talking about that soon too. We'll figure out the Facebook and the Twitter eventually, so just keep following all the socials that I've been talking about and follow the other ones too, and I'm sure you'll find out about the episodes. Thanks to everybody who's been subscribing to the Patreon. As far as I know, we're keeping that the same. We'll probably just change the name on it, but it'll be the same link and everything. So thanks again to everybody who's been subscribing to that this year. You'll probably be getting tons of new stuff, new content. Between Greg and I, we'll have all sorts of cool stuff, and we're talking about maybe doing like a message board, which will come into play with some other stuff that I have in the works too. But yeah, as I've been saying, this is episode 100. It's been in the works for a while. I feel like part of me kind of wanted to hold back on it a little bit, but the way things have worked the last few weeks, it kind of worked out that Jim and I had to kind of wait till now to record this because I went out of town for a few days for a wedding, and having kids that are one of them is in preschool now, as my co-host and I have talked about, and some other people and I have talked about, those are like germ factories for kids and other people, and so that's been going around, as you can probably hear in my voice. Um, but, so we were talking about doing this for a while, and it just took a little while to get together, but this is episode 100. So I don't even know where to begin, actually. 2.5 years. Been kind of rolling with this. Just kind of started as like a project, as I've referenced on here several times, just to kind of keep busy during the quarantine. And I don't even know if I would make it to episode 10. I had a list of a lot of people to interview, but it was just kind of one of those things where we'll see where we go with it. And that kind of brings everything into play with doing the podcast with Greg now, though, because, Greg and I have talked a lot about different ideas, and he's been a pretty good co-host. So him and I are going to move forward with the Hardcore Podcast Archive. After this episode will be called that from now on. So look forward to that. I'm not exactly sure what we're going to do with all the episodes yet. We already have 3 in the bag. Greg by himself interviewed Mike from Missing Link. He also interviewed with Michael Honch, Belvy from the Catatonics, and then Greg and I also interviewed Jonathan Buskey recently too. So all those episodes will be coming out real soon. We got a bunch of other stuff in the works too, so keep your eyes on that. But just really excited to have finally hit the threshold of 100 episodes. You know what I mean? I'm sure we'll be talking about it throughout the episode. But I guess I've been babbling long enough here, so we're going to bring on the co-host for this episode, my good buddy Jim Byrne, on the podcast for the 4th time. Without further ado, how's everything going for you tonight, Jim?
Going well, man. Congrats on the 100, and congrats to you and Greg on moving this adventure forward into the new merger here, and a sick logo put together by Nooch. So doing really well. Happy to be here. Proud to be a part of the journey to get to this point, and yeah, happy to talk about intros, man.
Yeah, we'll definitely be talking a lot about the intros, the stuff that kind of makes us want to get our feet moving. Like I said, I've been under the weather lately, probably for like the last 5 days. So kind of listening to some of these songs today was able to kind of get my heart pumping a little faster than usual. But I also want to mention what you said about Nooch with the logo. Definitely shout out to him. I'm sure we'll have that all up everywhere after this episode. And like you mentioned, and some other people have mentioned, we got to get going with some merch on that. I know Nooch has like a T Public store. I don't know if we're gonna put that in the link tree or not, or if he'll just keep it in his link trees. But Nooch has made like I don't know what you call that, like direct to garment thing with T Public, so you can buy shirts through there right now with our logo on it. But we'll talk more about that. But yeah, no, this is going to be a lot of fun. 100. We set out to do 100 intros, and I think we each came up with about that many. Well, you probably came up with a little bit more because you've been working on this for a while. Um, I'd say you've done probably at least 75 to 80% of the legwork for this one, if not a little bit more. So I appreciate that. But I guess with that being said, what were some of your inspirations and like kind of where'd you go to like to start putting the list together?
Yeah, I would. I think in like I'd said, I think in the breakdown top 50 breakdowns episode that there were like breakdowns that were like, oh, like this is something that we mosh to, but some of those breakdowns were actual like intros or something along those lines, and so I had like started building like a parallel playlist with this, and it just was able to then be like, okay, this is a focus. It's much more um, sort of specific, I guess you could say, in terms of like we're just looking for things that like start off songs, and then it kind of broadened from there. Where obvious intros are going to be probably some of our top tens that we'll probably agree on. But then it just kind of snowballed in my head in terms of like, well, it's not just like the start of terror is like not this time or something like that, or a Judge intro that's like a classic Judge intro. They're like fast parts or cool build-ups, and I mean I think there's kind of like a formulaic sort of classic hardcore intro, especially of kind of like an old school sound that is I'm sure going to be mentioned, but then it became as diverse as hardcore is, between like more like hip hop influenced stuff or more metal stuff, and some of the newer bands who are kind of like reprising some sort of more subgenres out of hardcore that kind of created their own stuff. It was cool to be able to put that stuff together, and like you'd share me other folks who you asked about this list. I asked Sean McCarthy and Dan Butson, like, hey, what do you think of this list so far? And they're like, that's good, and they asked about the ranking, but I wasn't concerned about that yet. So it was cool to be able to, again, kind of like with the breakdowns list, be exposed to new bands or like songs that I didn't know from other bands. Some new ones would pop up. Thanks to Spotify, kind of having its different LinkedIn or like suggestions and stuff like that. There'd be a couple new bands that would like come on, some band that I like their radio list or something like that, and then I'd text you and just be like, "Yo, King Nine, check out this friggin' intro, heavy," and like it, kind of like again, kind of like matching up with sort of some of the elements of the formula of good hardcore intros, like that you said, get your feet moving. So it was really cool, and then I kind of some of it was also like going back through bands that I know their catalog well. I'm like, but is there an intro in there? So like it was cool to kind of journey back through some of those songs. And then there's obviously it's subject to interpretation as to what you think may or may not constitute an intro, but that's up. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I guess. But it was fun to put together, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's one thing that I wanted to mention too that I was thinking about while you're putting this together is like how do we define an intro? And you could go with the classic like a floor punch or a war zone, where it's an obvious intro, or you could go with the more basic like the riff, or even you threw Can We Start Again on there from Bane, and for an intro for that, that's more of a vocal intro, and Um, so obviously there's different ways of looking at it. Like you said, I'm sure we're gonna have a little bit of overlap in our lists. I know this list is definitely a little bit more diverse than the last time we did it. There's still a lot of New York hardcore on there, but it's probably not as dominant with New York hardcore. And I know your cousin Alex also contributed to the list. Shout out to Nickel City Podcast, NCS. But some of the shit that he put on there kind of makes me think about, like, we could have gone more with like a lot more foreign bands too. Like I know he threw some Japanese shit on there, and there's some European bands that I could have dug more into that I listened to in like the '90s that I would have been like, oh, even like maybe like a sportswear song or something. I could have put one of their intros on there. But again, if we're gonna dig deep with some of the real obscure shit. I know sportswear is not exactly obscure, but you know what I mean. Like once you start really getting in there, we could have come up with like 500 intros easily, And I think as of the last writing, we were close to 200. And after we talk about this episode tonight, we might get to 200 by the time this conversation's over. Because there's one. I was looking at my list, my top 10, and I think I have maybe two at most that were in the breakdowns episode. But then I noticed one that I was thinking about putting in there too that I'm not even sure if it's on the playlist yet. And that was definitely my top 10 breakdowns, and it would be a top 10 intro too. So I think that's a good way to segue into us talking about the list for now. One band that I don't know if they make my top 10 overall, but one of their songs should is Judge, Take Me Away. I know you got some Judge on there, but I don't know if that one's on there. But that's an obvious one. That's definitely a heater, And I kind of open up the floor to you now for if you want to talk about some of the songs that didn't make the top 10 that are on your playlist, or even if you want to put some other. We'll get to like honorable mention type stuff, or maybe even the dishonorable mentions at some point too. I'll leave it up to you for now, though, how you want to talk about this a little bit, because I have some other stuff to talk about too, obviously, with stuff that didn't make the cut.
Yeah, it was tough to really put together that top 10 after all these because there's just so many, and it's just like kind of like it kind of can sometimes like catch the mood. So I'm gonna kind of that's where I was just like, all right, what are the ones that like absolutely, like if I was to go with the top 10, what are the ones that absolutely, no matter what, when I hear it, like if it cycles through, if it's like shuffles on or whatever, if it pops up in my brain during the day or something like that, that like there's just no doubt, like I would, like spring out of a wheelchair with a broken leg and like drop the crutches and go onto the floor for it. That was like my ultimate inspiration because there's just so much good stuff there. And then I also realized that there was like a definite era of sound that produced some really good intros, but a lot of them are, they're similar sounding. They're all really good and good, hard, bouncy, like New York inspired stuff. Between like No Warning, the Mongoloids, Final Word, that bouncy New York style, similar sounding riffs, but different enough to be unique in their own right. But then there was like bands where there's not like it's not like a true intro in the sense, and there's like a couple of sheer terror songs that like really just like get you going from the start. There's just something the sound that they had when they recorded those tracks, like Cup of Joe. What's the other one? A couple in there. And I remember seeing them. They came through Tucson in 2018, I think. And yeah, Brendan was playing with them. They just sounded absolutely tight. They sounded really, really good. Super heavy, but solid. And I was late to getting the show, so I caught like the kind of like the encore, and they played four more songs. And Cup of Joe, and I think maybe Ashes. A couple of them were just I just went absolutely nuts because they're just like those riffs are just so good, like deep kind of like tribal stuff. So those were kind of the inspiration. Like that's the stuff that is not exactly everyday kind of cup of tea like that I would rank up there, but like, again, kind of like get you off the bar stool, get you out there going, those kinds of tracks. And then there's other ones where I kind of like started to make some categories in terms of like the classics or like cool stuff, that's not that's kind of outside the formula a little bit, and there's really cool things within that. And then some of the newer bands, and I would put like newer within like the last like 5 to 8 years, who it's kind of like a mix of like they're cool in terms of like creative and innovative, and they're still like hard intros that are like gonna get everybody moving and shit like that. But then there's also like kind of like King Nine and like that World War IV band who are like they kind of stick with the old school formulas. So those are kind of some of my didn't quite make the cut, but like they're they're on the list for that reason. They're on the playlist, I should say.
I want to cut you off there because I noticed you snuck in. I feel like we had kind of a rule with the breakdowns where we weren't going to put like more like current bands because they didn't have like enough time to make a list like this or whatever. Especially with that episode, we said that with episode 50, and I noticed you at least snuck in Shackled, which is a more recent band. And if we were going to put in recent bands, obviously we would put a few Section Hate songs, a bunch of God's Hate songs, a bunch of Speed, End It. I could go on and on. I mean, even locally, Who Decides probably has some good shit that I could probably break down. And, especially locally now, World Purge is coming up too, our boys. Not to have too much, biased opinion with my podcast partner now, Greg, playing drums for that band, and they'll have already played their first show probably by the time this episode airs. But speaking of that, I also want to say there's a few bands that I would have had biased for that I didn't suggest, and they're not all on Spotify. Standfast, Hero, I would have put on there. That's not on Spotify yet, but semi spoiler alert, that'll be on Spotify real soon. That full length. So other locals that I'd be biased on, obviously Borrowed Time that you played in. I don't know the name of the song, but do 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 do. That song. You know what I'm talking about, or whatever. Like that. There's a couple of ones like that. And then Dawn of War had a couple. And then you and I were talking beforehand about Bad Business too, and I mentioned that I know at least their demo had an intro that I would put on here, but again, I feel a little biased, and luckily most of the stuff that I just mentioned is not on Spotify currently. So, and I guess speaking of that too, I also want to mention a few other bands that aren't on Spotify that would probably make not my top 10, but definitely a top 182 intros list like we've got here right now. So a couple songs each I would probably put from No Justice, Straight Ahead, and God Below. Especially God Below, I want to say. I feel like, people who listen to this from this area might be familiar with God Below, but if you're not from like Rochester, Syracuse, Buffalo, you might have kind of missed out on them in the early 2000s. And Brendan put out an LP. Brendan and I think Andrew Bowman, Alone Records, kind of put that out together, but they put out an EP or an LP for God Below, which was fucking tremendous. And there's at least one song on there that I can think of. I can't remember the name of it, but I would put that on an intros list. I don't think that's on Spotify either. And I had suggested to you beforehand, His Hero Is Gone, the song Like Weeds. I think that's off Monuments to Thieves, which I guess isn't on Spotify, we realized. That might make my top 10. That's pretty close anyway. And then Catharsis, a song which probably would have been on my top 10 breakdowns too, which is also pretty close to my top 10 intros. Choose Your Heaven. I highly doubt that's on Spotify. And then we were talking about the infamous Downpresser intro earlier too, which apparently that doesn't seem to be on Spotify. That wouldn't be on my top 10, but that's definitely up there. That's a hard one. But like you said, there's so many, like we could make a list of 200 hard intros that didn't make this list. You know what I mean? So I guess maybe we'll just talk about a few more that didn't make our top 10 before we start breaking into the top 10 a little bit. One thing that I noticed, well, with Life of Agony, I guess I've never really dug too deep into them. I like them, but I've never really listened to that album that hard. And I'm listening to that, and I'm like, yo, I never realized how much Cold World fucking apes off of them. Because that song, I forget what Life of Agony song you put on there, but uh, I feel like Cold World just stripped that down and used those parts all separately on like different songs or whatever, you know. And I know we have a couple of good Cold World songs, at least one on here too. Copernicus. That one's oh man. I only got to see those guys once in Philly, but it was a good one. So I know you mentioned a few, but any other standouts for you that didn't make the cut before we start jumping into our top tens?
Yeah, I'd give some regional shout outs to out to Buffalo. Infamous used to play in the intro that was just super heavy. Great build up, like most good intros have. That just led into like a crushing breakdown, and obviously Joe was a pretty damn good front man and agitator at the local skate park shows, calling out the security guards. Classic, classic scene. But then I've got some starters coming back to keeping in Buffalo, Slugfest and Despair. But it's kind of like they're not sort of true intros, but they're pieces of the song that aren't repeated in the other parts of the song, but Vogel puts vocals over the top of them. But like Slugfest has two, and as a bass player, I think it's what the hell's that track? It disappeared on me. I think it's One to Blame. It's a cool, really cool bass intro, and that is dope. But then there's a lot. It was Life of Agony this time. Just like a thunderous, deep sound that they got in there. And you're right. It hadn't dawned on me. Cold World has shares some influence with. But I would also say like there's Trapped Under Ice has like really great starts to their songs. They're not again like sort of like true classic intros in certain realms, but like they're off their demo. There's just so much bounce to their songs, especially like the demo and Stay Cold. That's just so excellent. Really good, really well written songs. Dead Wrong out of Connecticut, like a true classic intro, and a great sample to start off that EP, Hellbomb. That was a fun band to catch on, and I remember not long ago I'd asked you if you had booked them, and I was like, I felt like you did. It was a Penny Arcade. I don't remember the rest of the lineup, but that was a good one. Ringworm has at least three for me. Two off of Birth is Pain, the first song on the Birth is Pain album, The Sickness, that quick drum fill with guitars coming in, and Furnace's vocals just make you go nuts, man. It just like taps into that lizard brain. But then off of their it's the Numb record, which I guess they got before they drop into the or not Numb record, but what the hell am I trying to say? The Numb intro to that recording. I guess they got like the recording engineer or somebody who like worked at the producership to do the line "There is no God." That was a kind of a fun liner note to that song, but that's got a cool breakdown to it, and like hearing some recording of them playing their whole set of the Promise album live again. I don't know if it was like an anniversary or something like that. That's just such a solid record. And Ringworm's kind of had like a cool arc to their stuff. But it's a mix of like metalcore bands, heavy kind of thug bands, and old, sort of traditional old school. Like it's really a diverse list between like some of the favorites, and then like kind of some one-offs in there. But it was again kind of tough to like start to get the scalpel out and cut some things. Stout from Baltimore has really from their album Sleep Bitch has two really good ones. Ill Omen and Gods of War, super dope. Wisdom in Chains has The Sound of the End and Game of War. I mean, just stuff that, like, if they were to start their set with that when people are hyped, really good stuff. Blacklisted's Eye for an Eye is on here again because it's that badass. Yeah, man. I mean, there's a real good. I was like happy to put this together to kind of share with people. If somehow they're newer to these bands, that they're like, oh man, this is dope too. But it's oh man, we were talking about that Misery intro earlier. That was a cool band. They thankfully came through Tucson and they played some of the songs off of that record and their other stuff, which is like kind of a little chunkier. Nah, man, it was really cool to put this list together.
Yeah, without spoiling too much of my top 10, I guess, a lot of it is older stuff, and most of the stuff that I'm going to mention now before we dive into the top 10 is not older stuff. You mentioned TUI. Uh, we could probably put like that whole Stay Cold record on here, at least half of it. They had a bunch of other shit. Those riffs were just fucking tremendous. I know I mentioned Speed as a current band, and I know they're kind of like a hype band now, especially after playing Sound and Fury. But they definitely remind me a lot of TUI and a lot of that fucking like hard New York shit. And I'm sure they're gonna make it onto this list when we get to episode 250. Um, depending on what Greg and I have planned for celebrations, I guess, for those kind of episodes moving forward too. Shout out to Greg for letting us do this episode 100. But no, it's gonna be fun. But no, let me look at my list here that I got written down here a little bit. So, a couple others from the early 2000s. Death Threat. I know you got a few on there. That we could have put a few more of theirs too, though. Come to think of it, there's a few bands from that area too, from New England, that made the cut too, from that era. Ramala. I know you kind of snuck some Blood for Blood on there this time. We didn't really talk about the whole canceling of certain bands on this one, so I guess we snuck at least one of theirs in there. Oh, dude, another band from New England that we've talked about, maybe even the first time you were on the podcast, but Since the Flood, that fucking intro, Gone Tomorrow, I think it's called, off their first full length. I mean, some of these intros, like I know we've seen these bands play too, but like I'm talking more like a big like 1,000 cap venue or whatever. You just picture an intro like that and a band hitting the stage, and it's just the place just goes nuts, you know? Like, I haven't been to a show like that in a while. Like, I've been to a few fun shows, like uh the show that I went to in I think it was August that Who Decides played with some new Syracuse bands. That kind of had that energy. It was at the Bug Jar though, so there obviously wasn't 1,000 people there, but there's definitely kids going off, and it's always good to see. But other bands of that ilk, First Blood, you kind of had to push them on me for a little while, but I finally kind of caught on after like a year or two of hearing about it. And once that full length came out in 2005 too, California. I mean, again, another one that you could put pretty much every track on a top intros list. And that also brings me to mention a few other bands that I didn't suggest to you because we already had so many songs. But Figure Four, they definitely have some songs that could have made it at intros list. And obviously Andrew's other band, Comeback Kid, um, Poison the Well, and Shai Hulud. I feel like if we were going to go in a different direction, we could put bands like that on this list too. But we didn't put any of them on there. So, but shout out to those bands anyways for being influential. And especially Comeback Kid. I saw Andrew like 4 months ago in Buffalo. Those guys are still fucking doing it, touring all the time. But a couple other bands that did make the list before we jump into the top 10, I just want to throw mention and shout out to because they're good bands and important to me, I guess. Killing Time I'm gonna mention again in a little bit, but we could put that whole fucking album on there. I mentioned that to you in the chat today. I know you ended up putting like 4 of those songs on the list, but we could have put the whole thing on there. Um, No Warning. We could probably put a lot more of theirs on there. I'm sure we're gonna both talk about them again later, but and then probably a couple other bands just to mention. 10 Yard Fight. That whole era, late 90s. That's when I first started going to shows, like 97, 98, and I saw those guys a couple times. But there's a bunch of other bands like that from that era that we could probably put on this list too. That, again, I didn't want to go too crazy with it. And then 2 other ones that I just want to mention. That Modern Life is War, The Outsiders intro. That's another one that I only saw Modern Life is War once. Sketchy and I booked one of their last shows before they got back together like 7 or 8 times. We booked one of their last shows in 2008, and I think they played it that night. But that's another one though that I imagine seeing them in a big place, and when they play that song, just people going nuts, And then one final band that I'll mention. I had to put a Code 13 song on there. That's a band that, again, when I was first getting into hardcore in like the mid to late 90s, like 96, 97, my friend Ben, who I had on here several episodes back, he was listening to a lot of shit like that, like Code 13 and Spaz and Monster X. But Code 13 has kind of more of like that crossover, like they're a fast hardcore band, but like especially now where they have more bands like that, they would get over more, I feel like, with more of a crossover hardcore vibe, and not just like the basement dwellers or whatever you want to call them, with all due respect. But I think for me that pretty much wraps it up before we get in the top 10. Oh, also shout out to Agnostic Front. I didn't put any of their songs in the top 10, but I damn well could have. And I'm sure we could probably find like 10 or 20 more songs that could make top 10 of theirs that aren't even on the playlist. And also, I didn't make mention of this yet, but most of these episodes are making it to YouTube now. So shout out to Jim for coming dressed for success for the episode. We're going to be getting into the top 10 now. Do you have anything else you want to add before we kind of start jumping into our top 10s?
Yeah, I mean the list of honorable mentions is long. I would say, like, to give props to like Breakdown, and some of the, and like the Tomorrow Fades Away, the start of the Battle Hymns for a Planet, or whatever that one is. That one's a cool intro. The start of Megalomaniac on Plus Minus is really good. I mentioned that we on a previous episode that we had stayed with somebody from Knuckle Dust. They have an intro to one of their I think it might be their first full record release, or early on, but Time Won't Heal This, the start of that one, got a cool sample in front of it and a really dope breakdown intro in there. There's just a ton, but there was somebody I wanted to not miss. AF definitely in there in terms of like honorable mentions, and like, yeah, you could kind of run those things. But if we're also getting to like some of our favorites, and like I said, for me, like I came down to like the ones that like really just absolutely set the fire quickly and on it. They're in there. So a lot of the bands that we had on the breakdown list, but there's a couple ones from Terror that are on here that are like the start of the 25th Hour track is good. I kind of consider the This World Never Wanted Me as be a good one too. Let's see. I think that's kind of some of my honorable mentions in there. I mean, First Blood, like king of samples too, in terms of like the movie samples, to be able to like bring those things in. Man, yeah, there's just a lot of good ones. I think, all right, Bubba. But yeah, there's a couple that can't be on here, like you said, because it's not on Spotify, um, which may or may I don't want to spoil in case like those are in your top tens. But yeah, ready to go. I don't know if you want me to start on up. Do you want to kind of bounce back and forth?
Yeah, that's the way I was gonna suggest to do it. I was gonna say one of us does 10, and then we kind of go from there. Now, I do want to mention one other thing real quick that you've kind of referenced a little bit here and there throughout the episode, is that I was kind of thinking about just being an asshole and putting like 50 hip hop intros on this list because I could easily come up with like, Gangstar, just so many, you know what I mean? Like, and I was thinking about that beforehand, but I was like, no. But a hip hop podcast is something that definitely would be fun to toy around with down the road, So we'll see how much time we end up having down after preschool and kindergarten and whatnot. So if you want to do your number 10 first, you'll say your 10, and then we'll kind of talk about it, and then I'll do my 10 after that, I guess.
Yeah, I was playing around with having the X-Men animated show intro as a top tenor. That's a banger for sure. Okay, but for real, number 10 for me is going to be Archangel's "Annihilating the Peace." That from their a record that has like a kind of an acoustic intro, and then builds towards kind of like some hits and some uh, guitar work in there. And then it leads. I mean, that record. I speak highly of Kickback. I think Archangel's kind of like Kickback's cousin. Okay, Baba, go get one. That they're just kind of they're right there. And I know I think the singer from Kickback sings on a song or two off that record. But Archangel from Belgium, the record's "Hope You Die by Overdose." That one is. Like I said, if that were to pop up on shuffle, just out of nowhere, that's one that like just fires the endorphins immediately. It's a banger for sure.
I don't know if I could be wrong because it seems weird because they're from Europe, but I feel like She Who Will Not Be Named had some beef with Archangel for some reason back in the day, and so I never really listened to them. And it's weird that you mentioned the kickback thing though, because when I don't think I had ever even heard Archangel, because for that whole thing, because like some shit happened back then about them not being real vegans or not being real straight edge or some bullshit, which I'm pretty sure if you Google that, that really is true. But yeah, I don't give a fuck about that now either. But back then, I was just like, yeah, and I didn't really listen to much metalcore anyways. But what I'm getting at is you mentioned the kickback thing, and I had this playlist on shuffle a couple times when I had Marley, my daughter, going down for naps, and the song came on, and I thought it was a kickback song. So it's funny that you mentioned the connection with them too. And man, every time I hear kickback, I just think about like mid '90s France, those guys handing out flyers at a show, and some dude being like, "I'm not going to that," and just him getting his ass kicked. You know what I mean? Like just some shit like that. Like those guys, you just don't know with people like that. Like those guys, they lived it, man. I don't know them, but I just from the interviews and seeing them play that one time and stuff, and just the lore, they seem like the real deal. So, um, my number 10 is not quite as metalcore, but it is a band that I love. Probably one of my favorite hardcore bands. Um, it's funny because I was trying to think of a Bane song to put on the breakdowns list, and I'm sure I probably could have thought of a couple. There's a couple I can think of off the top of my head, but there's just for some reason the direction we're going in that episode, I didn't. But there's a couple that we already talked about. Can we start again? But I actually picked Some Came Running off of Give Blood. I think it's the second track off on that album, and that album came out, I feel like I saw them play quite a bit, and the energy when they would play all those songs, but that song especially, it's just I know we've been talking about especially like energies are where it's going to come up a lot in this episode, and the energy when they would play that song, it's just I just want to fucking dive off that stage immediately, and I did a lot, quite quite a bit to that song, So that's my number 10. And I'll kick it back over to you for your number 9.
Yeah, when you sent that one, I was like, oh man, and like that record is something. I'm like, I'll just make a special time where I can like set apart like 25, 30 minutes and just be like, I need to dive back in to Give Blood, and to appreciate, like really appreciate that again, because it was, it's different than the first two, but it was really cool. And like you said, like they were playing out a bunch. They came through upstate a lot, and we were fortunate enough to see them frequently. Gonna stay in my metalcore arena for number 9. We're gonna move a little east of us over to Troy, New York, and that's Stigmata's "Save Us." It does get folded into like lyrics and things like that, but it kicks off that record, and I think it has elements of intros with like the drum roll into just a heavy like stomping breakdown that just like I can only imagine that thing in its heyday, with some thick boys out there doing some harmful things to people. But yeah, that's one. I mean, that was later on. That was when I lived with Aiden right there off of Monroe in 2004, and I came across Stigmata. And just, how have I not, I have not heard of this band, and like got into this stuff, and that record was just on loop as I'd go out to work and go out to school at Brockport, and I remember just like how many times I probably like punched the shit out of the steering wheel to that breakdown. Oh man, Stigmata's "Save Us" is my number 9.
Let us pray. Yeah, that's good shit, man. I like it's same as you, and I think I might have even seen Stigmata in '97. I can't remember because all those Troy bands pretty much played here, but it just wasn't really my thing back then. I wasn't as into it. And now I love all that shit, man. I would love to see those guys again. Um, but number 9 for me is it's gonna be you mentioned 2004. We're gonna go back just a little bit further. 2003. We saw this intro come to life on their tour in Syracuse and Buffalo. And we had talked for years about Terror making this intro a part of their live set again, and then all of a sudden, wouldn't you know what happens, but they threw it on an album, and the song "Prepare for the Worst" by Terror makes number 9 for mine on the top 10. I missed that show in Buffalo last year. I don't know if they're still playing this song live. It'd be cool to see it again. I don't think I'm going to really mosh that much anymore, but I'd probably still stand up front and just, get the whole feel of everything. But obviously, I had to throw that on there. I don't know if I stole any of your top 10s there, Jim.
No, I didn't. Part of me thought it would get mentioned at some point, and it was right up there for me. Man, yeah, it was funny. Like all we had to go on was that 2002 Corona recording on YouTube to like activate the memory banks for that one. And kids, dreams do come true sometimes. You speak it into the universe and it manifests itself. God, that one is so goddamn good. And when Vogel was like, hey, May 6th or something, whenever the record was coming out, and he's just kind of just like ... just you wait and see, and it was just titillating enough, but to have us both be like, I think he's talking about that. Yeah, that was really dope. And then the rest of that track, that whole album is so damn good. Todd Jones is just genius. Okay, I'm coming up to not. What the hell did I do? Oh, okay, I got it. I jumbled my numbers. Number 8 for me is kind of like sticking in a classic formula, and that's "Burning Fight" by Inside Out. A dope a dope intro. Like I said, kind of sticks. It kind of comes out of a classic formula of the old school revival there in the late '80s. Um, really cool build up, and being a big Rage Against the Machine fan and finding out that Zach was in Hard Stance and Inside Out was really cool. He kind of came up the roots the right way, and um, who did somebody who the hell covered that? Was it Murder Weapon covered it at one of your stash fests up at Penny Arcade?
I've seen a few bands covered over the years. There was a few covers at that show that I do remember that. I don't remember if they covered it that night. I know. I don't know if it made your top 10, so I won't mention it. Another band covered an intro that night, so I'll save that for later. But yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned that because that did not make my top 10. But well, first of all, some Rage Against the Machine songs could definitely make this intros list too. You know, um, but no, that's a song that I definitely could put in the top 10. I definitely back that. I love that record. Shout out to Sonny for always unearthing random fucking Inside Out stuff. I don't know if he's gonna find uh I can't think of something funny, like trivial to say right now, but you know what I mean. Just like some fucking random like drum cam recording from Zach De La Rocha's kindergarten fucking graduation ceremony or whatever. So no, I'll do my number 8 then, I guess. We're gonna go back to Connecticut. I guess we're gonna go there for the first time. I don't know if we've gone there yet, but Hatebreed, one of the first bands that, like, when I started getting more into like modern hardcore, I guess you could say, they were one of the first bands that I got into. Like, I had listened to like what you call like old school and like classic hardcore first, and then around like 96, 97, I started getting more into like, Hatebreed, um, just all sorts of shit that was around at the time. But that 7-inch, Under the Knife, I bought that at the infamous Integrity show in Rochester. The Catharsis and a few Troycore bands played. And I remember taking it home that night and just being like, what the fuck? Which, first of all, when you listen to that first song, especially like as I mentioned earlier, I'd been listening to like faster hardcore in the mid 90s, and when I listened to that 7-inch, the Hatebreed 7-inch, and I heard Jamie's voice, I was like, is this the right speed? Because like on that first recording of Smash Your Enemies, um, it just sounds so fucking dark and hard and like it's just like is that the right speed? You know what I mean? But that I've mentioned a few times like wanting to see some of these intros in big rooms, and obviously Hatebreed's a band that we have seen in some big rooms, and uh, it's cool to see people fucking go nuts when they play some of these parts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's funny. I had like a similar kind of feel to hearing the tracks off of Under the Knife, um, because um, Satisfaction's it's fast. That's a fast record. Aside from the breakdowns and stuff like that, it's just a lot of fast parts. And so you put on Under the Knife, and it's yeah, you're just like, whoa! Did somebody like turn this thing down? Is the record moving more slowly? What happened in the studio to this? Yeah, it's Smash Your Enemies. Is that your track? Oh yeah, fuck. Oh, one thing you had said, like kind of like where you started in listening stuff, that made me think of something to give kind of like a little bit of an honorable mention, and maybe is not exactly like in the lists that we've talked about. Is Minor Threats in My Eyes as a really cool like building intro, and that was kind of one of those. I knew like in high school when I was trying to get listening to more punk bands. I had like some of the tapes from more metal bands, but also Slugfest and Despair were on some of the tapes I was given as a sophomore and junior. But I was trying to listen to different punk bands, and I was trying to find kind of like the more serious sounding, because pop punk was waving, and I was in a band that was kind of like that, a little bit more sort of Pennywise inspired, but still I was like, oh, I don't know what this shit is. It sounds too too cookie. But Minor Threat was one, and that was definitely a song that like just lets you know like what kind of energy you can sort of uncork out there. But go ahead.
Before before you do number seven, I'm not going to spoil anything on my list, but I just want to say that we have not shown each other these lists beforehand whatsoever. So continue on with number seven. Sorry to
No, no
interrupt.
worries. Side note: there was Vogel was on Richie's podcast from Wisdom and Chains, and then they were like doing questions back and forth with each other, and they talked about bands that are like overrated or that people are really hyped on and that like you're not into. And it was funny that Minor Threat was that for the both of them. It just like cracked me the hell up. Okay, on to my number seven. I'm gonna go regional to where I am in Arizona, and that's Las Vegas is Folsom, who's If You're a Viper comes out. I mean that I felt like that like set the world on fire in 2004, 2005, whenever that came out. That intro, it's like three intros in one. That was insane, and like hard lyrics, kind of funny, a little tongue in cheek kind of thing, like kind of tough guy, but you know, they're if you see these guys, you know, they're not like big beefy, Fury of Five type dudes or whatever. But that, like, I think it's Saving Private Ryan is like the sample in the beginning, and then just like this machine gun cadence to the riffs and the drum work, and then, man, there's just some bangers all throughout that whole thing. A good EP, but that thing is just in and of itself like a Magnus opus of probably 2.5 minutes. I don't know how long that thing is, but that's one where I'm just like, like game on, like, oh shit, you hear the like going on in the background, and to me that's like that's just that intro. Did you book them over at? Didn't they play? Didn't you book? They played Rochester. Did you book them?
They they played the Penny Arcade. I'm pretty sure you said you went, but I didn't book it. That was the like I stepped out from booking shows for a little while, and I don't know who was booking shows at the Penny Arcade then. Scorp, maybe was that his
I have
name?
no.
I don't know. There was a few.
That's
There was a
true.
few weird eras where there was like people booking hard, and it's all due respect because I know now that I'm like trying not to be a gatekeeper or whatever the term is these days, that everybody kind of came from different places. And I guess I should have mentioned that when I was talking about the Hatebreed song, because they were definitely influential on bringing a lot of people into hardcore that probably wouldn't have gotten into hardcore beforehand. And like I see people now online talking about how they've been going to shows for X amount of years, and I'm not really one to talk either, I guess, because I haven't gone to a million shows in the last 15 years. But like when I see people talk about how they've been down for all these years, I'm like, yo, you weren't going to shows in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Like I don't know why people try to front now like they've been down for like 30 years. Like I get like you went to see Sick and All and Hatebreed once a year, you know, that's cool, you know, but like there was a hardcore scene, you know, and we were all a part of it, you know. And again, I'm not trying to be a gatekeeper. Like I know all people came from different places, and shout out to Hatebreed for introducing people to, you know, different crowds like that, because you know hardcore is fucking huge now. Like when we were coming up, it was still kind of like a basement and VFW thing, which I know there still is a scene for that, but now it's, you know, there's also a bigger scene for it. And I also just want to say LVHC for your your fucking Folsom track there. I'm loving the fact that we don't have any overlap so far, and I don't think this one's gonna make your list either. Um, so I'm gonna go real old. One of the first hardcore bands, really, Black Flag, for my number seven, Nervous Breakdown. Um, I guess I'll go with the Keith Morris, the 7-inch edition. I know, like, you know, Black Flag has like 8 different recordings of each song. But that's the one that I've always preferred for that song. Very simple song. We could put probably at least 5 or 10 more Black Flag songs on this list. They're not a band that like I've sat around and listened to like every week or even every year for my entire life. Like, I listened to them a lot when I first got into hardcore. I've gone back and listened to them here and there. If a song of theirs comes on my rotation, I'll listen to it. I probably don't really go, like, purposely sit down and listen to them that often, but they're definitely a band that is, like, important to me and is, like, well regarded. And I would be very stoked if I saw any songs live, if all that makes sense.
Oh yeah, when you sent that one, it was just, man, that song just is just like kinetic, like to carry through like the title and the lyrics and like how vocally he delivers all that stuff and like how the song plays out. Man, that song is just so friggin' good. And I think I'd only heard a couple of different Black Flag songs, like a mishmash, whatever you could sort of find on the internet way back when. And being my guideposts early on were like Aiden's mixtape that he made me, a couple other things, and then when I got to Raid Butson's CD collection and like his recommendations, they were for like kind of like more metallic or like thuggier stuff. That when it took like Hope Conspiracy covered that, I believe, that I heard this and then like heard the Keith Morrison recording and just really friggin' cool. They're such a great band, influential band. I was reading something with an interview with Daryl Jennifer the other day, and like, it was like, yeah, Henry was around, and he'd like get into the crowd and like basic kind of like stomp out dudes or like rough dudes up who were like obviously like sort of bad elements trying to either, maybe they were racist and like trying to disrupt Bad Brains when they're doing their thing or something like that. But yeah, just seeing a lot of, you can see how far a band like Black Flag has their influence when, you see it on tattoos or stickers or something like that. And, there are probably folks who wouldn't go to like basement hardcore shows these days or something like that, but definitely far reaching. Um,
um what Especially with the internet era and all these videos surfacing and shit, I love seeing, like you're mentioning, and I know we're not supposed to glorify violence, but it is what it is. I love seeing those videos when Rollins is just fucking berating people and just like literally pointing at like one person in the crowd and like basically egging them on to come fight him. And I honestly kind of segued that to Steel number 6 because I'm pretty positive that it's the first song that we're going to have some overlap on. So I'm going to go first here. We got No Warning with Behind These Walls. That might be a little bit higher on your list, but we can talk about it twice if we need to at that point because it deserves to be talked about twice. I know I've mentioned to you over the years possibly wanting to lift cars to that intro. All sorts of crazy shit. But that's it's crazy. They're from fucking Toronto. It's not like these dudes are from like fucking like any low rent like New Jersey or Troy or like any other place, like even literally down the street from my house. Like, and that's all due respect to Toronto. I used to love chilling there before I permanently got banned from that country. Um, but the intro is hard as fuck. And I know we've talked about No Warning pretty much every time you've been on the podcast, and that's totally fine with me. Um, but I remember when all this was coming together, they were a really polarizing band, I think would be the word, or even hated by some people. Um, but I caught wind of them. Your cousin Alex and I think Sean Miller was his name, from Buffalo. We went down to one of those posse numbers. I think it was 2001, and they played that year. And there wasn't that many people watching them, but I just watched the energy that they had, and I was like, "Yo, this fucking band." And then like a year later is when this shit all came together. And man, we saw them play this intro a few different places, and hard as fuck. But where on your
we'll
list is
stay
this
with
for
it
you?
because it's too. You brought the fire into the room here. I had it at. I think I had it at 2, if my notes look right. I mean, dude, I saw that when I saw them almost a year ago. I don't know how time moves that fast, but like I'm telling you, and I think I had said it on the breakdown thing. Like I was it just like gives me butterflies. My heart was racing, like my adrenal glands are going. That breakdown, or excuse me, that intro, it's just it's just that high for me. Yeah, we got to see it a lot. There's if you want to start running YouTube clips on Posy Numbers, your boy here gets a little cameo, some screen time out there on that one. But man, that was just it. For I don't know, it's like that kind of stuff just would make me like get out there and kind of feel comfortable. Like it's just like it overrides a lot of like I don't want to say, but like hesitancy or something like that to go out there and do things. But like, man, that's the other one, kind of like the Folsom track. Like if that and then it just rings out, like it's just like, all right, drinks down, whatever you're doing, like look out, it's this place is about to go wild. And man, I was really happy that because I think they came out again in like 2017. They started playing out a little bit more. And I was like, oh, that's cool, good for them. I can watch the YouTube videos or whoever posts them and be like, cool. It kind of relive some of that stuff. But when I saw where they were coming to Phoenix last year and the stars aligned for me to go see them, it was pretty friggin' awesome. Like, there's just on so many levels, really friggin' awesome to be able to go out and see that, and pretty much know that they were going to start with that. It's what like I try to stay physically active, but like there's like that adrenaline rush and flush, and like my lungs were burning, on fire, out of breath. Thankfully, I was still masking at the time, and so I could probably people couldn't see me, like just my tongue out, dragging, trying to catch my breath, but like just trying to like take advantage of the moment of seeing those guys play those songs, but that one in general, man. And to like the energy that you're talking about, like that those guys still get hyped to do that stuff. I was listening to a podcast interview with Ben Cook, and he would say, he said he used to throw up. He would get so nervous before going out on stage and stuff like that. And to like know that those guys come out there and they're roughly our age, but like to play these songs that are 20 years old, and it still makes them go off on stage, no matter to the town and city and setup and stuff like that. Like there's just something special to that shit. So hell yeah, brother. Oh shit. Okay.
What's your number six
My
then?
6 is going to be Kickback's Heaven and Hell. That starts off the album Forever War, and that's really cool metallic guitar, starting by itself with a sample from Apocalypse Now, and like a perfect marriage of a sample and a band, and kind of like an ethos, if you will. It's funny, Butts and I had ordered a Kickback shirt from their first album, Cornered, and because Butson had sent me something that they had like reprinted these T-shirts, and so I was like I was like, which Instagram account is it coming from? And apparently, like the one I eventually ordered from, Butson sent me the one with the official one. And apparently, there's some JJ style drama here, but I ultimately ordered the shirt from the singer's Kickback account, and so there seems to be a little bit of a divide within the band, but that track is just so dope. That's what I was like. It just kind of sets the tone with like a kind of a I don't want to say creepy, but like just I don't know, man. Kickback just fucking rules. And then it just busts into like fast part as it builds in, but it like as an intro in terms of like setting the mood for what's going to come next. That's where it just sits with me. So like personally, it's kind of like an all-time classic because they were one of earlier bands that I got into, again, like listening to cassette tapes, um, rocking that stuff. But man, they just good songwriting, creative, kind of in the vein of All Out War, but with like a with an edge to it, with like with a snarl to it. So yeah, that Kickback Heaven and Hell sits at 6 for me.
Man, talking about Kickback twice now. Was that the one that we had on the breakdowns playlist too, or is that a
Different.
different
Heaven
song
and
you
Hell's
had
the
from
first
them?
run, and then Forever War is actually the second track. So Forever War was.
Forever War, yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, those guys are. Yeah, no, we were talking about it before. Those guys are hard, and I just, I feel like that Nightmare on Elm Street movie where Freddy jumps through the phone and starts attacking that girl. I feel like if you don't say positive shit about Kickback enough on this episode, they're gonna find a way and come through and fuck you up. So shout out to Kickback. I think my number 5 is one that might have some overlap, but since I already stole one of yours, I'll have you go with your number 5 now.
All right, fair enough. Speaking of French bands, real quick, I want to drop "Take It in Blood." Is like a new French band. I think they share members with Worst Doubt. Oh man, Button and I kind of talked. He was like, "What is it about like dudes with a French accent that makes like English sound that much crazier and harder?" But anyway, "Take It in Blood." They've got an EP out. It fucking rules. Kind of sounds a little bit more like fucking remember their name now. Oh, it'll come back to me. Okay, number 5. From the Mistake by the Malake. It is Cleveland hardcore, canceled bands, awful politics, but for me, one of the best intros, and that's One Life Crew's Murdario Stomp. Um, Probably some stomping would need to be had of their politics and bullshit, that kind of stuff. But whether or not that may or may not have been tongue-in-cheek, Murdario Stomp is just such a hard intro. So it makes my top 10.
Judging by uh, me and Steve's activities in recent years, I don't think the politics were a joke on the record. I agree the intro is hard. Um, I feel I don't know if I've ever seen any bands open with it, but I know there's videos of I know a band that I booked a few times, Problem Solver Revolver, opened with it. I might even not have heard it back by then because I never had the CD because obviously it got or the LP. I forget which one it was, but either way, it got shelved pretty quickly. So it's more of a digital thing. Um, but my number 5 is again I mentioned them before. Killing Time. We could have like half that record could make a top 10 list. And I think this song might be in my top 10 breakdowns too. I'd have to go back and look. But I'm going with Backtrack again for number 5 because once that once that shit starts, man, it's game over. I know we've kind of said that for a couple other songs, and honestly, pretty much all the way through the rest of these 5, it's like that for me. You know what I mean? But I mean, for God's sakes, how many times do I have to mention on here that I lost a tooth to this song? You know what I mean? When your first band there, Something Sacred, was playing your first show in the basement. Shout out to Jim Callahan. Helped me co-host a couple episodes back. Greg and I hope to get him back on to help us co-host again in the future. It worked out pretty good, I thought. But no, I've never seen Killing Time either, and I know, you can say sometimes it's different with seeing bands now versus 30 years ago or whatever. It was still cool seeing Judge, so I would take it now with Killing Time if possible. I don't know if that would still work out or not, but um, then I feel like them and Breakdown are the two New York bands that I haven't seen that are probably on the top of my list. And actually, not that I mentioned, you mentioned Breakdown before, and there was a couple of their tracks that I was pretty close to putting on here, but they didn't quite make the cut. It's mostly New York all the way out not quite all New York, but mostly. So that's my number 5 though.
Oh man,
Backtrack.
you're right. Like that, and like I think I said it on the breakdowns episode. Like the diversity of the riffs on that record. There's just they just don't they don't they're not cookie cutter to even to themselves. Um, Cheap Thrills, the way that record starts, like that itself is his own sick ass intro. Then there's other ones that I added down there that like that satisfy this stuff. But then yeah, I mean, I think that then speaks to like Killing Time's backtrack has to be then by our standards like one of the best hardcore songs of all time. It's got like a tight ass intro. The lyrics are fucking sick. There's a sick guitar solo in there, and it's got one of the best fucking breakdowns. So just like check all the fucking boxes you want. It's up there. It just happens not to be in my top 10 on this one, but god damn, it is a favorite. My number 5. Let's see. Ready to go through all that stuff. Holy shit. Oh, I'm up to 5 or 4. 4. Yeah, you're right. Is Judge's Take Me Away. You had mentioned it earlier. Like literally, the riff starts with like dropping into it. And that they just nail it. And it has, that intro has a couple of different elements to it in terms of riffs and things like that, in terms of kind of ringing out riffs to like the sort of breakdown part to it, and the way they tie it in and then eventually bring it back. It just it makes me go nuts when I hear that one, and I'm sure like I remember like the video you sent when you were seeing Judge in Buffalo. It's like fuck, so awesome. And yeah, like to your point earlier about like seeing these guys 20, 30 years later, whatever, do their thing, and they're whatever. I don't know, man. It's just however you want to make it in your head, and to go nuts to it stuff, and then like to know somebody like Mike Judge like really gives a shit about it, and kind of like the trials and tribulations he's been through to get back out there and give passion to his lyrics is really really awesome. Somebody on some Instagram channel, might have been a mix of the two, or it was could have been like a photojournalist who had posted their stuff, but it was when Killing Time and Breakdown played like a tribute show to Richie, their recently departed guitar player. And maybe I knew about it, maybe I didn't, or whatever, but certainly wasn't there. But they were like, Breakdown and Killing Time were going like song for song. So Anthony would like drop the mic and then like pass it to Jeff for Breakdown, and they would just go back and forth between playing a Killing Time song to a Breakdown song, and like just that's so cool. Like that idea in general, but then like them to carry it out and to be a fan in the crowd for that would just be sick. Okay, so yeah, Judge, Take Me Away, my number 4. Certainly a ignite the flame kind of intro.
Yeah, no, I haven't seen them play 2016. You're right, that was incredible. Just that they opened with that, and or maybe they played that second. I can't remember now, but either way, it was phenomenal, and I would see him again. And I was thinking too that I don't know if 185 Miles South has done something like this or not. I'd have to maybe ask them or look into it. But like 92, Barcelona, they had the Dream Team, Jordan, uh, you know, Barkley, the whole team, you know. So that's 12 people on a basketball team. We could go 15. It'd be fun, maybe some episode to put like a dream team together of like the best like guitar players, bass players, drummers, and vocalists like in hardcore. Because I'm thinking about it like while you mentioned Judge, you got Mike Judge, Walter, Sammy, which Sammy actually segues into my next my pick for number 4, which I was talking to you about this before. Uh, I mean, even the riff itself, like just a you could consider that an intro, I guess. But the horns for fucking New Direction from Gorilla Biscuits are my number 4 intro. And maybe if I had only listened to this on like CD and LP and digital my whole life, I would probably be like, that's fucking stupid to put the horns on there. But having seen them play twice, and both times, I want to say, I don't know about the show in Denver, actually. I don't know if they had. No, I think they did. But I know in New York City, when I saw them, they did it. They did the horns live. And people just stage dive immediately when they hear that shit. You know what I mean? And it's incredible. And uh, I wouldn't say Gorilla Biscuits is my favorite hardcore band, but they're definitely one of my favorite hardcore bands. And Start Today probably is my favorite hardcore record. If not, it's definitely in like my top 3. But yeah, definitely New Direction, and I just want to be specific, and it's the horns that do it for me for
Yeah,
this.
that was one of those where there's certain songs and like riffs and styles or vocal stylings that once they kind of get out of like maybe the bands that somebody recommends that you start with or that you found in or something like that, um, where you're like, oh, I didn't know it was possible that you could do that kind of shit, because you stay with like a Black Flag or a Minor Threat, or if those are kind of like some of your introductory bands, you're like, okay, it's like not necessarily like, okay, they're very serious, or it's this is how you do it, and it's going to be kind of within this stuff, and also kind of like knowing that like punk rock got its start in terms of like being anti the 7-minute songs and all the like wanking that took place in what we call classic rock today and stuff like that. That like all the like it's just like stripped down and this and that. And to hear Grill Biscuits start out with that little, I mean, who the hell came up with that? It's like there's like. Do they think that's like the start of like a horse race or something like that? Because like that's where like the galloping fast part comes in after that. That was really cool. But it also makes me, uh huh.
I think. Sorry to cut you off. I think it really is. I could be wrong, but I want to say in an interview they said it's off of some record. But I'm sure Alex or Derek or somebody from NCS or some other scholarly hardcore mind will hear this part and will let us know immediately. But I'm pretty
That
sure
makes
it is
sense,
off
and
of some
especially
other
being
record.
like, like you said, the musicians in that band were like musicians. Um, but like for me, also like I'll kind of hit back to some honorable mentions. Leeway, Aiden had Enforcer on the mixtape that he made me, and that talk about like not only a style as being certainly more crossover and thrash compared to the rest of the stuff that he put on the mixtape for me, but like the production of that song. I mean, eventually the whole record when I got around to it later. But I remember like hearing them, like, what is this? I kept kind of like looking at the tape and like the names associated, like, oh, Leeway, okay, with this or that, because the sound sounded like it was way different. It was like technically like leaps and bounds compared to the other stuff playing. And then like Eddie's vocals, I was like, man, this sounds like a young Steven Tyler or something like that. That was kind of one of those where like it deviated from like what I was used to, and certainly like what was on the tape, and other bands did on that mixtape as well, but certainly that one. And then another intro that's not on here is Crown of Thorns Juggernaut, and that's where I was like, Juggernaut, like, oh, you can be from New York City and be hard and kind of be playful and into these other things, and just play differently. Like Train Yard Blues is a break from this stuff, but it's still kind of within those things. So like, just want to give you know shout outs to those folks who kind of kept pushing the bill of being creative and things like that. So I don't know where we're at in terms of you or me.
Uh, we're at number 3. I just want to mention that I when I was talking about bands covering bands at that fest that I did in 2003, Desperate Measures covered Leeway's Rise and Fall intro. I want to say they did it a few times, but they definitely did it that night. But that was one of the ones that I assumed would be in your top 10. And I'll actually go now because you referenced this song earlier, and that's when I mentioned that we have not shared our top tens with each other at all. Minor Threat in My Eyes is my number three, and well, first of all, I mean the opening, the intro to the song itself is just it's just fucking ridiculous. And like I know we were talking in the beginning of the episode about like how we define intros, and I think we have got a pretty good diverse selection of what are different intros. I mean, obviously I just used a fucking horn intro one track back, but um, I think musically though, like mine is a lot more of like older, like old school, I guess you could call it, and yours is a lot more like metalcore. So I think it's a good mixture for people to kind of see what kind of different intros you can hear. Um, but with the In My Eyes, one thing I think about a lot with that is the movie Another State of Mind, which covers Social Distortion going on tour, which that is actually very similar to a lot of tours that have been talked about on this podcast. Just a lot of, having to duct tape a lot of things together, basically, but basically, while that's happening, when they're in DC, they're in the basement watching Minor Threat. I think it's just a practice playing this song, and it just sounds so hard. I mean, I love the album to begin with, but I remember when shout out to Spindle, who was on here several episodes back, when he lent me that VHS of Another State of Mind, and I first saw that part, I was like, holy shit! I'd only seen a couple live Minor Threat videos to begin with, but seeing that like raw, just like them like practicing in a basement or whatever, I was like, man, that shit is so good. And I remember reading in like It's Alive fanzine or something like that, the band In My Eyes, on their first West Coast tour, they opened with this song on some shows out there. So that would have been fucking cool to see. I feel like I've probably seen some bands cover this, but never like a caliber like that where it's like a band on tour and it's like something like that when they're opening with it too. So yeah, that's my number three though, In My Eyes.
Yeah, man. Like kind of like we said on the breakdowns one, like you think they're like you hear something and like you could reconfigure your list, but fuck, so damn good. Okay, my number three is going to be Terror Is Not This Time, and it's that guitar ring out, it's those tribal drums, and just I think too it's there's nothing there. It's one of those things where I think like the when you hear something live for the first time, there's sometimes like you're just kind of like hyped on the energy of the place, and like there's a new song they drop and you can kind of pick up what's happening with it and move to it in whatever way. But when they played this one, it was just evident. Like you could just it felt like when they played it, because they hadn't released the album One with the Underdogs yet, and they played it, and I remember vocals say like this song was written for the dance floor, and their merch guy Charlie came out and was just going nuts for it, and you're just like, oh, there might be something to this one, and of course there was, and I remember being like fully exhausted at the point that they'd play this in their sets because there's just so much to do throughout the entirety of the song, but like this is the one where, again, it's just like I feel like obviously there's like idealizations or romanticizations about things, but this is one with like you're on the front lines of the battle and you've got like a sword or an axe and a shield, and like this shit comes on and you're just like, all right, let's go, and you start clanging your things like Braveheart or something, and you're ready to go. I remember this was in my head. I graduated undergrad and had a fire to keep being quite physical with other human beings, and was going for a grad degree at Brockport, and somebody who I knew, his brother had been on their rugby team, and so I played on that, and we were going to kick off, and like that was in the back of my head the entire time, and it's just like I just kind of kept it on loop, and I just kept this intensity. So that's why it's so high for me. It's just for me, it just taps into a lot of shit that just makes me, lift heavy things. You could knock down walls. You could do a lot of different, very animated, adrenaline-driven, violent things to this, and this is that for me.
I wonder if they've played Prepare for the Worst and Not This Time back to back on any of these recent tours, and what the vibe would be like for something like that, you know? Yeah, obviously Jim and I are a couple of marks for Terror, you know. We fucking love that shit. There's a couple bands that we probably would get pretty nerdy about and have always kind of gone back and forth on. I would say Terror, No Warning. Uh, there's a few others, but and then again, another one though, Terror. I know we've said it a few times, but shout out to Terror for still doing it. Fucking over 20 years now. It's fucking dope. So we got two left each. I'll let you do. I don't think we're gonna
Well,
have
my
any
number
overlap on our
two is
final two, but we'll see. I'll let you go
Behind
with
These
yours
Walls by
first.
No Warning. So I'm not gonna. I mean, you could fire me off for another 5 minutes talking about how awesome that is, but I've already hit that one. So I don't mean to short-live it, but bounce it back to you for your number two.
Yeah, I forgot. I totally forgot that I spoiled the fun on that with number six. Um, well, for number two, um, again going back to the dream team of if we were to put that together for an episode. I know we've already mentioned Judge, Porcel, Ray Capo. They would probably be on my dream team. Youth of Today, Expectations. Uh, I think Can't Close My Eyes. The EP was the first shit I got from Youth of Today, like 96, 97, and that 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 fucking intro to Expectations is I've never seen Youth of Today live, but I can imagine. I've seen. I don't know if Gorilla Biscuits did it both times that I saw them, but they definitely did it in Denver, and I feel like that I've lost it more for that song than any of the Gorilla Biscuits songs, and I like Gorilla Biscuits more than Youth of Today, but that intro for that Expectations song, it's hard, you know. Sorry to any listeners if I sound sick. I still am kind of battling it a little bit and a little stuffy. So that's that, I guess. But so
I
anything to
think
add
those
with
like
that
that
before you do number
era you're
one, Jim?
talking about, Youth of Today, Warzone, like those guys being able to come up with that kind of stuff. And I had to get into like kind of, I mean, I think there's like a certain kind of, I don't say genius necessarily, but like creativity and ability to like in 30 seconds or to a minute to start something. There's something like breakdowns. If it's like a minute to 3 minute song, there's all sorts of like opportunities to like preview something, give you a little taste here or there, and ultimately build up to like a crushing breakdown or something that makes you go nuts. But like intros, they're just like right off the bat, like, can I grab you with this one riff, or like a lead up into it within like 10 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, or something like that, and make you lose your mind. And especially if you're like, you're a band on tour and you're going to, and you're kind of new and your stuff's not really out there and people don't really know you. Like, can you come up with something that like switches people on and they have no idea who you are and they've never heard you before, but like they can hear this shit and just like bounce to it and get ready to go. So I think like a lot of what has come up with that is good. Like, but I can't imagine this is your number one. So we haven't talked about this, but in the vein of your Gorilla Biscuits, New Direction Trumpets, Trials intro to Are These Our Lives is like, I remember like Aiden being like, yo, have you heard Trial? I'm like, I don't know. He just like slipped me the CD. He's like, listen to that and tell me what you think. And I put that on, and it was again one of those like boundary breakers where you're like, what? This is, how can be? and it's the orchestral kind of intro, but like it is badass. And having kind of been raised in a more somewhat in music programs coming through school, you kind of get classical musicians and composers sort of beat into you. And there's like like the Time Life classical thunder series that would come out, and it's like Mozart, Beethoven, and kind of like the heavier stuff. But it's like they tapped into that, and Trial's introduction is just and the rest of the album is just so good. So I wanted to quick sort of step aside on an honorable mention to that one before my number one kind of comes back to the more stripped down things, and that's going to be Sick of It All's Clobbering Time as the for me the number one. It's a timeless classic. 87 and their first release. It gets crowds going. They still use it to this day. They're just brilliant. Performances, musicians, and entertainers in that way, but also just like there's diversity in what's going on with that stuff. There's obviously the build-up, there's a breakdown that you can pick it up and get fast and things like that. There's the things that they do with it live to get crowds into what they're doing and things like that. I don't know. It's just it's also one where like it's not. It's just one that I would, if I got the chance to see him again, obviously quickly go off for, and also just like go full blast for. You could go like 0 to 100 for something like that. So shout out to Sick of It All. Speaking of bands doing it for a long ass time, to see those guys still going out there, recovering from all the medical and other health issues that they've endured, and just be able to continue to navigate the world and be a successful touring band. Can't stop the kudos for them.
That was one of the last bucket list bands that I booked in 2003. That show, when we saw those, I know we've talked about that on one of these episodes too, where we saw those guys like 3 or 4 nights in a row. And going back to that Trial intro though, I listened to that, well, maybe not today, but definitely recently. And it's funny that obviously the orchestra intro part is it gets you fucking going too, but the actual intro where they're playing the guitar and the drums and that mosh part, like I saw them play a couple times, but only once on that album. And when they played in Syracuse, they played at the Westcott, and people were going nuts. They open with that song too, and man, that album is just fucking classic. I love that album. Can't say enough good things about it. And another thing too about them is I can't remember the name of the song, but I want to say either the Foundation 7-inch or there was a 7-inch they did on Crime Think before that too. They had one of the songs on there had a fucking a really good intro too. We're gonna have to get Greg Bennick on here on a future episode too. That's something I was thinking about before, and now that Greg Benoit and I are running this and kind of trying to do some bigger interviews, that's somebody I would definitely like to get on here eventually. So I guess that leaves. I guess you mentioned Sick of It All. It's Clobbering Time. That's definitely good. I honestly, first of all, you kind of threw me for a loop, because I guess I'm with all the fluid in my ears still. I didn't hear you say that the Trial was an honorable mention at first. I thought you were doing that for number one, which I was like, holy shit. I was like, that's a good. I could use that for number one. It's a good one, but I was kind of surprised you were putting it all the way up there. But no, Sick of It All makes a lot of sense. That's that fucking that first 7-inch and that first record. I mean, their whole catalog's flawless. I'm not gonna front and say I've listened to like their last couple albums, but I'm sure those are good too. But no, the Clobbering Time's a fucking good choice. As well as, and I'm really surprised that there's only one out of 20 songs that we each that's the same or whatever, common for us, overlap, whatever you want to call it. So no, for me though, number one, I think they might have been my number one for breakdowns too, but they're my favorite hardcore band, so makes sense. But this is also my favorite intro. I feel like it was Harley Flanagan in the American Hardcore documentary that talks about just that fucking Bad Brains, the big takeover. When those fucking drums kick in and just when the whole fucking thing picks up, man, that's a fucking intro right there. You know what I mean? I mean, they got a couple good ones too. I feel like you put Right Brigade on the playlist too, and there's other ones, but no, that's just one that fucking gets your blood pumping, and it makes you want to fucking go ape shit, you know. Um, I haven't mentioned this on here in a while, but my son's initials are HR. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
I'll
man.
leave it to you with that, I guess.
That was um, Big Takeover was also on Aiden's mixtape that he made me. So they had like cemented themselves as in a special category and unique to their to in and of themselves. Bad Brains early on, and for me, and yeah, dude, it's um, man, it's like all like the recording that sound, like the rawness of what's coming through on that. Um, and like I said, I was reading that article the other day about with Daryl Jennifer about like what they were trying to do early on. It's just like, we saw a lot of these bands like from England, like a bunch of white dudes talking about like, f this, f that, and we wanted to be like, yo, this is how we do it too. Um, so like, and that came through like the ability to like get your message through not only like lyrically, stylistically and like artistically in terms of like album cover and shit like that, but like have it sonically come through and you could feel that shit like that's where I think bands, whatever sort of variety and genre they play within hardcore, like that just sets them apart because you can like tap into that shit. But fucking yeah, at Bad Brains Takeover, yeah, you could like put 3 of their songs in the top 10, just like somewhat objectively, but we're going on our favorites here. But hell yeah, man, like you said, just like go absolutely ape shit if they were to play that stuff, 100%.
All right, so that's pretty much gonna wrap up our top tens each. Again, the playlist is gonna have a lot more than that many songs. Like I said, I think when Jim and I last talked about it, it was up to 182, and I wouldn't be surprised if uh, some we don't have any body count or iced tea stuff on there yet, so the playlist could get a little bit bigger soon, Um, but it's the same thing as the breakdowns. I think something like this will just be fun to reflect on, maybe 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road, um, maybe reconvene and see like what songs we missed, what songs have become more classic since we recorded this. Um, like I said, obviously you did a lot more of the legwork this time around. I kind of did today the kid preparing for his test at the last minute. Um, I had listened to the playlist a few times and I had sent you ideas a few times for intros. But I think today I mainly mapped things out, what my top 10 was, and some more ideas on, um, stuff. I'm sure there's a ton of songs that we're going to have missed on this. I'm sure once we uh, well, I guess it doesn't even matter after we hit record because we can always cheat and add stuff to the playlist before we post the episode. Um, but I'm sure at some point we're gonna text one or the other and be like, man, we should have put this song on there. We should have talked more about this or that. Um, but I also want to say that I was thinking about this when I put my list together, and um, I don't know if you'll agree with me or not, but I feel like my list is a lot safer, whereas you kind of did more like trying to introduce people to some artists too at the same time, whereas mine is more. I mean, there's a few like lesser known bands on here, but mine's mostly like uh, not even really lesser known bands actually. Mine's all pretty obvious stuff, but I definitely went with the safer route. I think but a lot of this stuff for me is like stuff that like if I were to think of intros, like especially like big takeover and expectations would be like the first ones that come to mind. You know what I mean? So, but do you think that you went more with like with what like I'm saying, or do you think that you were more just going with like the same way
No,
as I like the first 10 you
I
would
mean,
think of
it
type
did
thing?
feel like not necessarily like freeing, but like with the top breakdowns, you and I were trying to find unity on that list, and with this one, we're like, no, let's let it loose. And for me, it was like, all right, because like these intros to me, how I think of them as intros are like I said, this is the shit that makes me go nuts. It's just like instantly they could like switch me on and go go AWOL too. Um, and what's also not on here for spot because of Spotify is Infest's Sicko, which is going nuts. Final Word has a live intro, kind of like Prepare for the Worst terror style that never made it onto recording. That is also a favorite intro of mine. Thankfully, it's captured on YouTube. But I just kind of felt like too it was there's many to choose from, and I'm just like, all right, these are like my go-tos for me, and that's like where ultimately that's how I made the decision. Was like, man, if I were to put these down, these are really it.
I'm already thinking of stuff that I know we haven't put on the playlist or we haven't talked about. Well, I know Our War from Canada is not going to be on there, but Shark Attack. We'll have to go back and edit some of the playlist a little bit and put some of these bands on there that we haven't thought about yet. I'm sure there's a couple other ones too. But like I said, we already have over close to 200 songs on there. By the time we post this episode, there probably will be 200 songs on there. It's not really in a particular order. I did kind of have a feeling that uh, that Sick of It All song might be number one because I saw the way the playlist was laid out before, but I wasn't totally certain. So no, it's been fun doing this. I appreciate you taking the time doing it again, like we did the breakdowns. Um, like I said, now that Greg and I are running this together, I'm not sure what we'll do for a 200th celebration, but I'm sure him and I will find some way to extend an invitation at some point to get you back on here and do something with the cowboy hat at the very least. Um, so I guess before I start wrapping up and kind of reminding people that we're going to be doing a little bit of a format change. Did you have any other final thoughts or anything you wanted to add for the 100th episode
No,
extravaganza?
it's a long time coming. It's just like it kept. I know, early on, like you said, when you first started, like a list of people, ideas that would bounce around, like you and I tossing around breakdown lists, hardest this or, that. And to have these things continue to come true and see the light of day in reality, it just speaks to like who you are and the kind of character you have and the kind of drive and will you have. I know you're making millions off of this, so it's really easy for you to step up and do this all the time. But all joking aside, man, no, I really appreciate what you do for somebody who's now 40, um, with a pretty busy schedule between kids work and other things. To know that like this is here and to go back on certain episodes and miss things. Like I was listening to Butsons the other day or today, whatever. It's just it means a lot because it's just like that connective base. Not only like in a nostalgic sense, but like the new things that you're doing, the ideas that you keep churning up, the way that you're pulling in Greg and the whole, like the archival process to it is just really special. And like you said, you have part of what you're doing is to make sure it's around like this legacy stands and your kids have something to look at, to know that like you're trying to share this important cultural piece not only for you but for other people. So it's a special thing, man. So it's not to name drop one of my the first hardcore band. It's something sacred. There's bonds, connectivity here that's really special. So I appreciate what you and Greg do and what's going to come out of this.
Well, I definitely appreciate hearing that, obviously. As always, I appreciate you taking the time to help out with this and all your other help you've given me with ideas for the podcast. I guess before we wrap up, I'm just going to mention a couple more things real quick, like we've been talking about throughout the episode. This is the last episode known as Enterprise Hardcore Podcast. Episode 101 will be known as the Hardcore Archive Podcast, with Greg Benoit and I running the show. Like we talked about in the last episode, you might hear some episodes with Greg hosting by himself, some with me hosting by myself, some with us both hosting by together, and then you might even hear some with like Greg, uh, me, and maybe somebody else hosting. We'll see how it all goes. We already have the next 3 episodes lined up. Like I said before, it's going to be Mike from Missing Link, Bellevue from the Catatonics, and Jonathan Buskey. I'm not sure if we're going to put them out in that order or not, but we'll do something similar. I know Greg's interviewing Hannah Mountain pretty soon for more of like a personal story. I'm going to be interviewing somebody from Rejection Pact probably pretty soon too. We've been talking about a bunch of other cool stuff too, so there's plenty of stuff coming up down the pipeline. But yeah, we're going to be now known as the Hardcore Archive Podcast. I want to thank everybody who supported us for all 100 episodes so far. This is obviously only the beginning. I know I mentioned on the last episode that I've always kind of mentioned to everybody who's been kind of close to me that, once I get to episode 100, it's going to kind of be like, not really make or break, but we're going to kind of be not almost like reshuffling the deck, which is kind of funny because that's kind of like what we're doing now, but I kind of wanted to get to episode 100 and establish everything, and then, hopefully everything will just fall into place from there. And I kind of have a feeling that with Greg and I working together now, that's how it's going to work out. We have plenty of stuff coming up, like I said. So just kind of check out us in the future. Like I said, you can still follow me on Instagram and Facebook. I'm still going to keep it Enterprise Hardcore Podcast for now. I'll probably switch it to just Enterprise Hardcore eventually. On Twitter, it's @Podcast Hardcore. Uh, Greg switched Rochester Hardcore History on Instagram over to at the Hardcore Archive Podcast. So make sure you give us a follow there. Like I said, we'll bombard you with links in the show notes and the link tree. So yeah, as always, thanks to Rob Antonucci, my co-host tonight, Jim, my future co-host, Greg Benoit, for all the support with the podcast. Thanks to my family for the never-ending support. Thanks again to everybody who's been supporting for all 100 episodes. See everybody real soon, and stay safe.